Welcome to the second season of the Make the Future podcast. I'm your host, Jacques Beauvais, Dean of the Faculty of Engineering at the University of Ottawa. Join us as we have conversations with different thought leaders about current issues facing the engineering industry. Let's explore the future of technology and innovation and how, through creativity and collaboration, we can make the future.
They say the future is coming, but that's not true. The future is already here. And it's relentless. It's not going to wait for you to catch up. How will we live in this future? How will we make sense of it? To define our course, we need a new perspective. One that engages our curiosity, that activates our imagination, one that defies the conventional. To own the future, we need to do more than just see it. We need to make it.
As for many faculties of engineering across the country, equity, diversity, and inclusivity are really important to us. We feel that it's important within our faculty in the way we train young people, but it's also extremely important. We're concerned about when they go and hit the job market afterwards. What's going on in industry, in organizations. These are really important issues, and they're starting to almost reaching a critical point right now where we need to be very active to find solutions to help out on that. And in Make the Future podcast is intended to be looking at where we're going down the road the next few years. What are the lessons learned by our alumni and friends out in industry? So we've been talking with some of our students and some very recent graduates about what their perspectives are on what's going to happen in the tech industry and what their hopes are and their aspirations. So we thought it would be really interesting to have a conversation with Thusha Agampodi, who's the engineering manager at Magnet Forensics, to join me for some conversation with some really insightful and interesting people. So Thusha is here with me now. Hi, Thusha.
Hi, Jacques.
So Thusha, you've been involved very recently. You organized the event of Better Together. Why did you do that, and what did you get out of it?
I've been attending a lot of women in tech events around Ottawa, and one of the things I noticed is that we were hearing from great women leaders, but often the audience was all women, which is great. I think there are times when women need safe spaces to, discuss their ideas and feel heard. However, I felt like, we needed men in the conversation as well, and all genders. So that was the thought behind the Better Together event, where we invited leaders from all genders to come together and talk about gender equality. And we focused a lot on, creating inclusive work environments, because one of the things I do, I've been doing some high school visits to talk to students about getting into STEM, and especially young women. But it was important to me that by the time they got to the workforce, that we had created environments where they felt included. So that was the reason behind the Better Together event. And we had a great conversation there, and we had a lot of leaders from Ottawa. When
you go into the high schools, what kind of reception do you get when you're talking about these issues? Do they already feel them, or are you meeting young people who are concerned, or do you get the impression that they're not reached a point where they're concerned about these issues?
I think it depends on what grade. Some of the visits I had were grade 9, and you can already tell. One of the first surprises to me when I walked into these high school classes was the fact that the rooms were 50-50. When it comes to gender diversity, I'm not used to walking into a room and seeing like half the room be women. But when we talked about engineering, you could kind of see their eyes light up when we talk about the impact we can have with, engineering. And I talk about the impact I have with my job. And I think perhaps they don't have awareness into the type of impact you could have with in these fields, because I can tell from the questions I get from them after, that they didn't realize you could have an impact on society, in these fields. And they also do ask questions about what the day-to-day work is like. Are you sitting in a cube all day writing software? I think I get questions from the girls in classes about, how much collaboration there is and teamwork and such. So I definitely think getting more role models out there to high schools makes a big difference in just increasing awareness of the impact you could have and also the different types of positions that are available.
And you can give them some good examples because from discussions we've had before, I know that at Magnet Forensics in the Ottawa office, you've been able to at least progress the balance of gender diversity in your group, right?
Yes, I've been working very hard to do that. I think it takes a lot of effort, and that work's never really done. You have to constantly keep at it in terms of if I hire women, then just making sure they continue to feel heard and included, and I do think having a female leader has gone a long way. Mm-hmm. It makes a difference in attracting more women into the team as well.
Yeah, and you're right, because that's one of the concerns I have in the Faculty of Engineering here at uOttawa too. It's that it's not just attracting them. We have to work hard to make sure that we provide an environment that is welcoming and respectful and gives them a voice so that they can feel that they can have an impact and really prepare them for later on in the workplace. If
you tackle one element of it, that you kind of actually get the rest of it. If you start building an inclusive environment for like one group, that you actually start thinking about building an inclusive environment for everyone. So I think I'm actually hoping that will happen. And I've seen that happen with my team anyway. Right.
But the tech industry in some ways, because it's a bunch of scientists and engineers working on technology, for many years there's been the appearance that from their perspective that technology is gender neutral, and it's never been the case. The exponential growth in the number of applications where we're using AI tools has raised a lot of concerns in a very public way. And I think it's raised the awareness that those biases are really important. They're making a difference, a negative difference in a lot of people's lives.
I'm a little concerned. I know there's a lot of talk of using AI when it comes to hiring, because there's a lot of bias already in terms of resumes and the interview process, and then there's talk of using AI to alleviate some of it. However, I'm glad to hear that these conversations are happening about the bias that exists in AI, because I'm a little nervous that we are going to replace the bias that we have in the manual process with AI that would also have a bias.
Yeah, and up to a certain point, because we're training the AI, we're actually codifying, solidifying, even entrenching the biases that we have, because once we've trained the system using literally our biases, and it's even more difficult to extract it out of there. So it might be really interesting to talk with Parinaz Sobhani. She's one of our Ph.D. graduates in engineering from 2017. And right now she's the director of machine learning in the impact team at Georgian Partners in Toronto. So she's both working on the AI front, and she's also working on the investments front in the VC field that could probably give us an interesting perspective about AI today and the biases that we find in that type of tool development, that type of industry, and those fast-growing startups. Welcome, Parinaz.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So maybe just start a little bit of a background question, Parinaz. We see that on Twitter you did mention that one of the reasons you decided to join the industry was because you really wanted to make a real impact rather than chasing citation. And I'm curious to see how your experience has turned out over the last few years.
I've been working on real-world problems that are important for our society, for the business, and for the tech industry of Canada. And actually, I feel I'm useful. Why? Because especially because I'm working with startup companies, and working for startup or with startup companies is very different compared to working for big corporations. Big corporations like Google, Microsoft, Facebook, they all have like a giant machine learning and AI team. So you might not feel as visible or impactful because there are so many smart people working in these companies. A couple of years ago, when you were talking about bias, we were like, why are working on like mathematical solutions, optimizations, techniques, where this bias is coming from? And you know that the main ingredient of any machine learning or AI system is data. Where this data is coming from? This data is normally coming from humans. Human behavior, human historical data, or you actually and explicitly ask humans to annotate or label your data. So, and we know as humans, we all have our biases. And of course, when the ingredients of your systems are biased, the system, even if we are using mathematical optimization, the system ends up to inherit all our biases and problems. So the problem is in our ingredients. And it's not an easy problem. Building a first system, it's not an easy problem. Why? Because even identifying all these sorts of bias are not easy. Even like if you look at human behaviors, it's so hard to attribute the behavior to like a potential bias or so many other things out there. So when we are building a system, a first system, first of all, we have to identify what kind of biases we can have. I can give you a couple of examples of possible biases. For example, sometimes the bias is coming from lack of having enough data of particular micro segments of the population. For example, you are building a healthcare system, but you might not have enough data, historical data of people of color. That's one of the problems. So historically, we haven't collected enough data from people of color for any reason. So then we build this system, and this system is going to make more mistakes for these micro segments of the population. Why? Because this system is kind of blind towards these micro segments of the population. So even as developers, we didn't make anything wrong, but we don't have access to enough data. And we didn't think about it because there might be some potential solutions. We can actually go look for such data out there, but we were completely unconscious about not having a representative data set. That's one possible source of bias. The other source of bias is bias in representation. For example, we are building a hiring system, a hiring software system. When we are building a hiring system, what really matters is the qualifications of the candidate. So the demographic information shouldn't really matter. It shouldn't really matter where are you coming from, what's your gender, what's your ethnicity, what's your religion. And so basically we shouldn't use any of such information when you are representing a candidate. So you might say, easy. So I'm going to remove all the information about your gender, about your ethnicity, like any direct information. I'm not going to use those information, but it is much more complex. Why? Because there are so many other attributes that have encoded our demographic information indirectly. I can give you an example. I'm going to ask you which social media are you using? And you might think, okay, it doesn't reveal any information about my gender or my ethnicity. But I can tell you that if your answer is I'm the Pinterest user, then with 90-80% likelihood, you are a white woman. So it's not as easy as saying, okay, I'm going to remove all these directly representing demographic information about myself. So there is, as I told you, this is another source of bias in representation. So you can imagine there are so many different types of bias in the data. And then actually identifying if the system is biased or not is, I call it a bug. It's like a bug. It's like a bug in any software system. And it's more similar to the security or privacy bug. And you can imagine identifying and detecting security and privacy bugs are one of the most difficult kind of bugs that we can have in software systems. So it really needs its own specific quality assurance. We need to have standard practices. And because these technologies are pretty new, we don't have such kind of practices yet. And most of the time, because we don't have, speaking of diverse teams, because we don't have diverse teams working on these problems, most of the time people even don't think about them.
Yeah. But I have two questions that come out of what you said. And, one of them is you mentioned that the development teams, they were not necessarily that diverse. So what I want to ask is, it's been in the news a lot in relation to AI, but does the notion of bias and lack of diversity potentially in the teams, is that really a new problem, or does the AI technology, has it brought a very bright light to shine on the issue, or is it really a new problem?
As humans, all the existing processes that are actually run by humans, they are also biased. So if I'm actually applying for a mortgage or for a loan, and I'm going to talk to an officer, there is a possibility that this officer is racist or sexist, and I might not get that loan, right? Not because of my qualifications or my application, but because the possibility that the officer is racist or sexist. But why it's even more important for AI systems? Imagine that if you're an officer and if you're a sexist or racist, how many people you're going to deal with on your daily basis? Maximum 10, 20 people, right? Imagine that one of the banks, they build an AI system and they put it in production and it is racist or sexist. Then how many people can be impacted by such system? It's going to be in the magnitude of thousands per day. Mm. So the magnitude of and the impact of such racist or sexist systems is much higher and more significant compared to having an individual in our system that they are racist or sexist. That's why that's why we should have more. We should have a better governance. We should have a better quality assurance for such systems, because the magnitude and the impact of such systems are much, much more higher.
Yeah. So it's not just highlighting the problem. There's actually also a magnitude issue.
And since we're talking about diversity, I think it's important to hear from someone who has a number of years of experience in the industry.
That would be really interesting. And I think one person that we've been having a lot of conversation with recently at the university is Julia Elvidge. She's a tech business leader that's working with early stage companies. She's been an advisor, a mentor, an investor, and a board member, and she could probably bring to our discussion really important insights. Julia, just to give us a little bit of background in the discussion, I mean, you've been in Ottawa for a few years now. You've seen it go through different phases, and you've seen Ottawa today is now recognized as one of the technology hubs in Canada. And you were also at Chipworks. You were part of a company that actually interacted with a lot of the other companies. Could you talk a little bit about how you've seen the Ottawa Canada North evolved over the years, and how has it evolved also in terms of the people in the companies and what you've seen evolving over those years?
I actually graduated electrical engineering and ended up in Toronto to start with a company called LSI Logic, involved in integrated circuit design, and it was a great opportunity. Had a lot of fun. I just loved microchips, and it was so new that we had we had to actually teach the industry how to make chips. at some point, I got the opportunity to move to Ottawa and run the design center here, and that was such an exciting idea. Ottawa was the place to be. There was the Nortels, the Newbridges, the Tundras, the Mitels, all of them working with LSI Logic at that time and involved in building their own application-specific chips. And so I was just ready to say yes. And exactly that week, I found out I was pregnant. And I didn't know what to do. I wasn't sure whether to bring it up or not, and I actually did. And they said, "Great, we'll make it work." And I commuted weekly between Toronto and Ottawa for the first few months, up until I was 8 months pregnant. And it was a great experience because I sort of moved into Ottawa and realized how great a decision it was for me to be there. There was so much opportunity. There was so much growth. There was so much excitement. And now this was an electronics semiconductor town. And it also was a town where I could actually have a life beyond work. It was a town where I knew I could get home to my kids within 15 minutes, not an hour and a half, and which was what I was living in Toronto. So, there was a lot of learning across companies, movement across companies. We went through employment bulges where Nortel was offering huge bonuses for people to come and work. So, you know, we as Chipworks were trying to come up with ways to recruit. And I remember we took a chip truck into the middle of Canada and handed out chips that at the bottom the paper said, "Come work for us." Once they finished their chips, that's what it was all wrapped in.
That's very clever.
But that was how crazy it was. There was just not enough great talent to go around. So Chipworks later on became a company that was fighting for that talent. And, you know, we were one of the companies that were bringing a lot of talent in internationally. To the area, and you saw a lot of that, people coming in from all parts of the world and becoming, you know, really part of the economy here. Ottawa's changed now. It's a little different. It's not as electronics. It's not as capital intensive in terms of the innovation that's happening here, but I love the startups. I love the SMEs. I love seeing that growth happening, and there's a lot of excitement about, you know, the next Shopify and the growth that we're seeing here in Ottawa today.
Do you feel that the ecosystem, if I can call it that, or the types of companies you talked about, the big players
Yes.
in the early days? My sense, because I left for 30 years and I've come back, is that it's a lot more diversified today. That's the feeling, the impression I have, but I'm not sure about that.
I totally agree. I mean, it was very dominated. I mean, I remember, I'm sorry, I was University of Waterloo grad, so
it's okay.
Everybody went to Nortel, and now it's not. I mean, you see, there's so much choice, so many small to medium companies that are doing really interesting things, and it's great from an employee standpoint to be able to, you know, try out different companies as well too. There's still some of the big guys. I mean, we still have our Siennas, our Ericssons.
I think I've noticed that too, and I know like our headquarters is in Waterloo, and they've noticed it there as well, as the big companies like BlackBerry started downsizing. Then what ended up happening is that the environment around all the leaders, the tech leaders who left these big companies started, you know, starting their own companies. So there's a lot of startups around, and I'm noticing that in Ottawa as well, as Nortel, you know, closed down, and then BlackBerry downsized in Ottawa as well. You can definitely see that all those talented folks who were at those companies are going and starting new things, which is great for the tech hub here.
Julia, to come back to this, is diversity a problem in technology companies in Canada today?
From an international, you know, employees, I see people from all over the world working in Canada in tech teams. And And I don't see in the tech team level, a white dominance right now. But, that's still a problem at the more senior management levels.
Okay.
And that needs to change. I really think that the gender issue is very severe, hasn't changed in decades, and really does need the focus right now. And there are just not enough women in technology. The stat of 27% women to men, or percentage of women in tech is too low. And that's for STEM. That's not engineering. Engineering, it would be even lower than that. I did electrical engineering many years ago. We don't need to get into details. I was 6 women out of a graduating class of 110. Electrical engineering itself really hasn't changed that much. Maybe it's 10 women out of 110. Maybe it's 15. It's still not good enough. There's certainly changes happening, I think, but they're not happening fast enough. And the problem is just getting them into engineering even. It's not about getting them to graduate. I think the biggest one is getting them into it. I've certainly trying to get girls, as in high school and previous, interested in the robotics, the semiconductor chips, nanotechnology, AI. That's some of the work that's being done here at U of O. It's at Carleton throughout. You see a number of different programs. There's a lot of different programs, Technovation, Virtual Ventures, the summer programs here I was involved in as well. They're all great, and they're all making a difference. But, at some point I want to talk about my time with 8 girls here this summer, because I asked them a question and I was very surprised by their answer. Why there weren't more women in engineering. This was a special class for software engineering. There was 8 girls, grade 9 to grade 11. And the quietest girl jumped up right away and said, because people think they're incapable, word for word. The second, a little bit older, said, because men don't want to hire them. And then the third, probably grade 11, said, because they're worried they're going to get pregnant and not stay at the job. And it's just like, oh my gosh, you girls are way too young to have these impressions, right? I mean, it's like, and I was horrified, actually. I was heartbroken and horrified at the same time, because I really thought that, well, that's what we knew 20 years ago. I would have expected that answer from grade 9 to grade 11 20 years ago. But, why now? I mean, I'm really surprised with now. Now, I did ask earlier how many of them were there voluntarily, and I think only 3 out of the 8 were there voluntarily. Their parents had put them in this program. So, but, they were, kids don't do things and if they don't want to at least try. Yeah. So they were somewhat interested. But it surprised me that they still had these impressions of the barriers, because I would say the opposite. I'd say there's men out there right now that really want to hire women, but they can't find enough women to hire. And it's something I think will help in the future. But that's coming back around to your question. That's the big diversity issue, I think, in Canada right now with technology companies is gender.
I agree. I think that's what got us started in this conversation to begin with. When I collaborated with uOttawa on the Better Together conference, which was really focusing on gender diversity. And I care about diversity as a whole, but I do fully agree with Julia that getting more women into tech is a big issue. And I've been reading a lot about why and how do we tackle this. And I don't have answers, but I can talk a little bit about the things I've noticed. Definitely, there's not enough women coming in, And I've been reading about some studies that asked women who go into engineering, when you ask students who go into engineering, why do you choose to go? And I think the answers you got from the men were just across the board, all over. But the answers you got from the women were more specific in talking about someone in their life that was an influence, whether it's an aunt or an uncle or a parent. And I can relate to that.
Sure.
I went to engineering because my dad worked at an engineering university, and a lot of the women I talk to have similar stories. So I think definitely, for one, examples make a huge difference, which is why we're speaking to Parinaz and Julia. I think the more examples we can get out, the better. And then, of course, once you get in, how do we build an inclusive environment? Because like Julia said, even if you get diversity at the lowest level, the entrance level, as you go up in leadership, you see it's mostly male. You see that the top 500 companies, it's like 4% or 5% are women. So definitely when it comes to performance reviews, there's bias there.
I hope you've enjoyed our conversation so far, and we're going to continue in an upcoming episode, and I really hope you'll be able to join us.